Good afternoon. Emily would like to introduce Nancye Gannaway to our climate resilience 100 event. I'm going to tell everyone a little about Nancye, and thanks James for sharing the information, because having known Nancye over a number of years, I've got to know her a lot closer, coming to the team for the climate resilience task force, establishing the DPIRD program as we move on. Nancye started out in 1991 doing a biological science degree and came into DACWA in 1997 Geraldton as initially landcare officer and then as a research and development officer. So working initially in the table grape industry, leading to a range of other roles, including land use planning advice for agriculture and design and evaluation programs climate resilience. After a short journey with the Midwest Development Commission, working on the Square Kilometre Array project, Nancye headed south to work for the Small Landholder Information Service in the small hills area. This role was about providing information and training opportunities to small landholders to improve land management. And as a member of this project, Nancye was able to contribute to national discussions and research on the impacts of small landholding land practices on agriculture. In 2008, Nancye began working on the pilot before, developing business management and risk management training to help farmers manage climate risk. Nancye also had the privilege of working as contract manager for the Regional Health Initiative and the Rural Financial Counselling Service, as well as facilitating social support campaigns during and establishing a senior officers group to facilitate information sharing between government departments and children throughout events. A short stay with the Regions program introduced Nancye to the extraordinary breadth of government investment that promotes social, community, economic and climate resilience throughout Western Australia. Currently, we're very proud to have Nancye on board as a member of the Climate Resilience Task Force, facilitating the new research programs that will support a low carbon future for sustainable development in regional Western Australia. Thank you, Nancye. Over to you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Sorry. So I would like to just take a moment to acknowledge everybody where they're sitting in the traditional landscape country that we're standing on, whether we're in Geraldton on Yamatji country, in Albany on Menang country, or here on Noongar country, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I think the whole context of my, need to look at everybody in the room, the whole context of my talk to you guys today is, I think that we, the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, is one of the state government bodies that has more thumbprints and more fingerprints on the climate resilience jigsaw puzzle than any other organisation, and we're all operating in many different areas. So, been around a long time, clearly. Now, have I been around a long time, clearly, and I'm just going to confess that I'm a little bit anxious about this presentation. I know that I'm amongst a lot of friends and amazing people, but in my career I've touched many parts of this organisation, and I never cease to be amazed by the extraordinary depth and knowledge and skills that we have across this organisation. Now, the spinning wheel picture on the left-hand side is an apology to everybody in IT that's received many, many emails from me over the years. I don't know how this technological stuff works. This particular presentation is based off, and I do want to have a little shout out to Lewis Mavrentonis and the Rural Business Development Unit for historical work that's informed a lot of my thinking. And this talk is based off a published document called The Evolution of Drought Policy in WA, which we thought was a good basis for Is it not changing?
Were you aware that it's on, not on presentation views?
Oh, thank you. It says I'm presenting. Why am I not?
No, you are presenting.
I am presenting?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So to come back to my thoughts and where I wanted to go with this. So this talk is based on the evolution of drought policy that Lewis Mavropanos and the Rural Business Development Crew shepherded into being. And the reason that we developed this talk is that we have the Climate Resilience Task Force has a sponsorship relationship with the WA museums to talk to urban populations about climate resilience. And we thought if we're going to be speaking in a museum about climate resilience, that we should talk about the history of climate resilience. And as I prepared the talk, I found myself going back a lot further into the past than I thought I might. Now, is that, no, here we go. So the plan for the talk is to talk to you a little bit about our history, to talk about innovations of significance, government interventions along the way and the things that we learnt, and what do we think a low carbon future might look like. Now, the talk is a little bit underdone from my perspective because it's quite agriculture centric, and I'm very much hoping that my peers in biosecurity, in fisheries, in aquaculture, in food trade and value adding, I know that I've missed important milestones from those important bodies of work, and I'm really hoping that you're going to help me improve my talk so that we can use this as a narrative to talk about the complexity of climate resilience and what we need to do. So apologies for the good folk that I've missed. Don't think it's not because I don't admire you. Alrighty, so we need to start at the beginning, and I'm very sure that some people will regard starting with the European history is not the beginning, and I would agree. However, boots on the ground, Europeans in the 1800s, what did we have? And this is what we had informed such a lot of what we see today. The landscape was extremely biodiverse. It was influenced by Aboriginal land management practices. And the reason it was biodiverse, not in part, is because the soils are very ancient, the soils are fragile, often acid and nutrient poor. And we also, what we couldn't see when we looked at this amazing biodiversity, and we thought it would be a good place to it would be a good place for us to have a community and to supply food. We didn't know that there was salt at depth, and we certainly didn't know that this landscape had historically decadal long dry periods. And there's a recent piece of research out of UWA where a lady has done the tree rings going back 800 years, and she's determined that every 10 years are dry, and then you have 10 years of average to wet. With occasional 30-year periods of dryness going back 800 years. So nutrient poor, dry as salt in the soil profile, and our First Nation fellow West Australians had quite nice, no input, fairly sustainable land management system that was meeting pretty much all of their needs. So, and I didn't bring it with me to wave around. However, there is a book by a man called Noel Fitzpatrick called In Response to Need. It is downloadable from our library. It's a great read. And if you, apologies again, it's agriculture centric, but it is the history of the Department of Agriculture. And Noel was our Director General for some time. And that's him on the right-hand side. I had the privilege of meeting the gentleman before he passed away, and he was a very special human being. It's a good read. Do try to get a hold of it if you can. So About 60 years after us Europeans got our boots on the ground, our focus was still very much around food security, which interestingly enough is increasingly becoming a concern for us today. But we'd only cleared about 50,000 hectares of landscape, even though we'd allocated 2 million hectares of agriculture, landscape for agriculture. The area that we had sown to wheat was about 14,000 hectares, and it was producing just under a tonne per hectare. A similar area would have been sown for hay, so livestock was a very important part of our farming system. We were focused very much on the more fertile parts of the landscape, the red earth, the river areas. Our livestock systems were also, for the most part, relying to a degree on native plant forage, provided it wasn't toxic and the 1080 or the York Road poison plants. This was a low to no input system with very little mechanisation. So along the way, I would argue that we have responded very resiliently to the many climate challenges and environment challenges that we have here in Western Australia. So in 130 years, we have increased our per hectare yield from just under a tonne per hectare to, well, truly over 2 tonnes per hectare in 130 years, and that's extraordinary. We've also gone well and truly beyond our planned to clear 2.2 million hectares, and our Southwest Land Division is 11 million hectares cleared, or it's a bit over, give or take. Right now, in this moment, approximately 2,000 farms are responsible for 80% of our grain production. Along the way, we untangled soil infertility. You know what? I did warn everybody about my lack of technological advancement, for which I apologise profusely. We learned how to manage soil acidity, and we created really massive economies of scale for our farming enterprises. So also over that 130 years, we went from almost no farms to 30,000 farms to now, give or take, depending on what measures you use, 12,000 farms. And this has had an extraordinary impact on our rural communities as well. And the world changed around us as we went along. And in the 130 years, we have, and this is not solely Western Australia or Western Australia agriculture, and apologies. So I would like to say that quite clearly. It's a whole global, the increasing greenhouse gas emissions with industrialisation and clearing of forests and the like across the landscape. We've had rising temperatures, we've had increased rainfall variability and a decline in our rainfall, increased rainfall, heat events, increased incidence of fire, bushfire and extreme events. And that change in our global environment has given us some big jobs to do. We're in the race for our lives. We do need to work very hard in the next 30 years to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to increase our carbon sequestration with every opportunity that we can find. And there are a lot of people that are looking very closely at certainly agriculture and big landscapes like our West Australian one as places to sequester carbon. The social system in which we found here has gone through time from being quite a simple system. In the 1890s, we had the ancient environment. We had pretty much two important players, which is government and farmers, and that slow uptake of landscape clearing for agriculture for food security led to government actively pursuing a whole range of strategies to increase available land for agriculture. Very quickly, within a short period of time, we realised that we needed to get in amongst disaster relief. We needed to have research. And then as we started moving into the 40s and the 50s, industry bodies, the need for social support, marketing bodies and things. And so we've gone from something that was quite simple with very few drivers. I think that as a driver for the way we do things, consumers really only came on board as big players, certainly after the 1980s, and with increasing consumer saying about what we do. So from simple to complex in 130 years. And all of these drivers are all interacting with everything that we do in this space. And it's changing every day. And I heard quite recently that agriculture is a system of two parts, and it's a system of economic and social systems that are resting on a biologic system. And within that biologic system is the food component that we create. And it's changing, and it hasn't stopped changing in 130 years. And we need to keep changing. So this next slide, if anybody knows Sally Forbes, Sally has described this as Nancye's herendogram, and I think she's probably right, and I'm going to fire that up. What I tried to do was map all of the major influences of how we got to where we are. And the thing for me, and it's incredibly complex and incredibly colourful, but the thing for me I'm finding in the climate resilience space is we need to look backwards to go forwards and to carry that history. And one of my first experiences in Geraldton, I was talking about liming with a group of farmers in the Chapman Valley, more specifically Frank Green and his wife Susie. And I remember Frank looking at me and saying, you know, Nancye, I can remember my granddad liming his paddocks, but you know, my dad never did. I never did. And yet now I'm a grandfather and you're telling me that I need to lime my paddocks. And what's happened? And the best answer I could have was, well, we've learnt some things along the way and we understand more through our various processes. So this talk is as much about not just the events and milestones, but the interlinkages of things and how they drive each other. Since coming to work last May in the Climate Resilience Task Force, Frank and his wife Susie have been haunting me to remember and to look backwards as well as forwards. So if I've got a vague look on my face, you know I'm being haunted again. So I wanted to start by talking about those events. Somebody wants a copy of the herendogram, no problem. Those events that are not about agriculture, but they've influenced agriculture in a profound and powerful way, and the communities and the regional people that surround them. And war is an event that impacts and has historically impacted on agriculture quite profoundly in terms of labour, the availability of inputs, and quite often on the back of that hardship comes extreme innovation and uplifts in our system as we find a way to resiliently respond. Disaster is not the only cause of uplifts of innovation. In my opinion, the introduction of the goods and services tax in 1998, remember that date, and also at around about that same, the early adoption of the internet and the rise of the broadband and the NBN, both those things staged the way for farmers to be in place that they are now, to be using all sorts of data to inform their decision making, whether that's online getting the best price for their crop, using the amazing climate modelling that we offer them to determine whether they're going to put a crop in, all of these things. But if you look for what was maybe a big kick, the GST, alongside the rise of the NBN, I think, triggered that shift for farming businesses into those sorts of systems. I have a bit of a repeating refrain, and maybe it's because of my history working in the pilot of drought reform, but in 130 years, I counted more than 14 drought events, which is about one every 4 years or so, every 3 years. Although some of those events have been grouped into periods of 3 events that went for more than 3 years. So water scarcity has been an ongoing influencer on our innovation and our shifts as we've gone forwards. But I do think that the innovation that we've had in agriculture has been us as an organisation working with farmers and the communities that we serve. So I tried to theme out the Harendogram, and this is a whole series of research and development milestones that I've tried to capture. So everything agriculture. I don't know if your head's aching, mine is, because an awful lot's happened, and this isn't a complete, this is a very poor snapshot of everything that we've achieved.
What are some of the big ones? I can't really remember.
My apologies. Look, if we're going to talk about agriculture, I think that the rise of fertiliser and then herbicides has been very important as an erosion strategy. The cultivation, I think the rise of genetics has been in that for broadacre agriculture. For livestock, the introduction of low estrogen clovers and identifying that was incredibly important in creating opportunities. For horticulture, I think everybody here knows who John Cripsart is, who passed away quite recently. And I think to think about the breadth of our work that we've done, it takes 20 to 30 years to get an apple to market. And if challenges with climate resilience, that's something that we need to be very alert to, I think. Thanks for the question. Recent work into everything that we've done in that research, and this is a factoid that I have cribbed from the fabulous Nancye Gannaway, is that every dollar invested into the research that we do has had a return of $9 to the WA economy. So we're hitting big. For me, this is too confusing a chart as I tried to drill down, and coming back to my idea of cogs driving cogs to and I'm hoping it's to your left of the screen. Everything to the left of the screen and the grain yield axis is pre-Europeans. We had a biodiverse landscape that was influenced by Indigenous land management. A lot of our early production gains were almost certainly achieved as a result of residual organic matter available in the soils that we had. The rise of fertilisers, mechanised cultivation drove production growth, but with cultivation we started to see wind erosion problems. Herbicide research gave us options to control weeds without disturbing the soil, but it has its own problems. There's also been the rise of dryland salinity. The increased productivity, it's been explained to me, has driven increased rates of soil acidity in our acid sampling soils. And so we've had to then solve that particular problem. In the 1990s, the rise of the short season varieties allowing us to capture the growing opportunity of producing grain in an increasingly short winter has been incredibly important. Although something that fascinated me is just last week I was out at Merredin and I got talking to Bob French. Now Bob is telling me that because one of the challenges of having short season wheat is, particularly at their end of the world, the wheat is very vulnerable to frost. And they're currently looking at long season or winter active varieties, including Ben Cubbin, which was first bred in the 1930s and introduced, which is a species that doesn't flower until after it's had an intensely cold spell. So they're looking to see whether or not they can take something from that variety to see if we can't get it across into our short season varieties. Frank Green, where are you? He haunted me again. So, and I think for us in the room and for everybody listening, I think it's up to us to work together to find out what those next cogs might be. And I think that we have the capacity amongst us all to do it. Working with human beings has always been incredibly important to us. And as an organisation, we have been incredibly early adopters of a range of different tools. Our earliest one was pre-1900s. It was the Journal of Agriculture, which was very scientific. And then we began getting in amongst radio interviews as early as 1924. So we were media hounds way back. By the 1960s, we started having farm advisors, and their job was to provide direct advice, farm table advice. And the last of those vanished from our system in the 1990s, which I personally am extremely jealous of, because I would have loved to have been doing that tabletop advice. And in the 1990s rose development officers like me who talk to groups with people and try to be more strategic and talk to more people at a time, which is why I wanted to leave the doors open, Jane, was so I could get everybody in the room. Now, as an organisation, we were early adopters of tools like the internet, and by 1996, the Department of Agriculture had more than 8,000 website pages because we had so much to say. Now, the universities only got permanent internet in about 1986 or 89, I can't quite remember the date. So within 7 short years, we had proliferated. And of course, now we are using social media and Twitter. We also learnt that we needed to talk to urban people, and the rise of the home garden service that you would now recognise as our pest and disease information service was part of our initial efforts to engage urban people as part of our biosecurity initiative and to provide advice. But there were other human capacity programs that came along, and I referenced to you earlier the rise of the GST, and one of the triggers for the Farm Business Improvement Program in 1998-99 going onwards was the rise of the GST and the realisation that farmers needed help to adopt computers and different information collection so that they could become collectors of the GST. And so that was some of our first understand your finances, your books sorts of training development that came along. Through RAFCOR, which you would now recognise as the Rural Business Development Corporation, there were farmer advice programs that came through in this period shortly after. The 2013 Royalties for Regions program was another program targeted at building farmer capacity to help them take control of their destiny and make climate resilience. Well, not specifically climate resilience, but take control of their research and understand where their resilient future might be. And I have, of course, forgotten to mention the pilot of drought reform, of which I was a member. And that work, where we work to help businesses understand their risk, understanding that the business that planned for risk would financially do better than the business that didn't plan for risk. And I think a family business that plans for risk, it's not only financial, it's also about the human, their mental health, being able to make a decision to not to lose less money, to exit in an orderly fashion than be forced out, and a range of other social benefits. So I think that's all I can say here, other than to reference the ag memos and the farm notes, which were incredibly important tools in our engagement. Now, a quick advert. I kind of want people to put their hands up now. I don't know if they can. Who's got the My Pest Guide reporter on the phone? This is a free service that we provide to absolutely everybody. Hey, I've got thumbs up everywhere. Yay! We all should have this on our phone. It's free. Now, Christmas time, I found a strange white gecko in my bathroom, and it had a startling resemblance to an invader Indonesia gecko. Turned out it wasn't, but we have an opportunity to play a part, and it's a really great service, and I encourage everybody to have that on their phone. And that can be your one piece of being part of the climate resilience puzzle if you would like. This talk is very government centric, but I did want to take a pause for all of the amazing farmer grassroots knowledge programs, because I think the farmers and the rural communities that we work with in every part of our organisation they've influenced us as much as we have influenced them. And and I think at different points, whether it's the farmer groups, and interesting ones to me is the Kundinan group, which was a group of farmers that really wanted to know more and to get more publications that they could read to improve their businesses, is now a national publishing group and information group. The oldest farm group that we could find, and I'm hoping that somebody might correct me and there's an earlier one that's still running, is the 1981 Corrigan Farm Improvement Group. But if there's one that's further back, let me know. Now, the Grower Group Alliance, and I do want to pull out a number here. Grower Group Alliance is now supporting 60 farmer groups, all trying to self-direct and manage their learning and hopefully direct the research that impacts upon them. And I think that this is a really important part of our matrix. For me, another important part of our matrix has been in the rise of the early 1990s of the Australian Association of Agricultural Consultants in WA. And they rose with the shift from the department having farm advisors to development officers, and a shift of officers from the department out. And that body of people have been incredibly important as a service provider to our industry, but I think also with their different perspective and as they interact with us. So let's not forget everybody else who's in the room. So our government. Initially, our government work to get things moving, a lot of our earliest initiatives were about making land available through making it cheap by providing cheap debt, and by providing different programs that will help clear land. And we were also, as a government body, we were also building roads and providing water supplies in the 1890s for
You're all good, don't worry.
things happening. You know, we were building roads and we were securing water supplies. And I think from my perspective, that's really interesting when I know that in investment management, I don't know if there are any current road building programs, but there certainly have been a few in the last couple of years, and we're definitely well and truly in amongst the, and somebody's nodding at the back of the room, so we do, sounds like maybe we do. So we're still involved in building roads, and we're still involved with the water smart dams, finding ways to secure water supplies for farming businesses and rural communities. There's Frank again. Pay attention, Nancy. Now, along the way, we've learnt that sometimes government initiatives have negative consequences, and some of our earliest responses to drought events was to provide subsidies for feed and for oil and things like that. The problem with that, hello,
Someone's
can you mute please? Thank you. And I'm looking at a speakerphone that's talking in my ear. So the thing about those subsidies is the business that knows that they're going to get feeds assistance is going to delay his decision or her decision to destock the farm. Now, what this means is that when they do decide decision, their landscape has lost condition and there'll have been erosion. Their animals will have lost condition and they will be suddenly sell their animals quite desperately into markets flooded with other desperate farmers. And those subsidies never cover the entire cost of feeding animals and keeping them on the property. Now, in 2010, and for those of you that are unaware of this, there used to be a line from Perth to Albany where we said everything west of that line it rains and we will never need to do drought assistance. In 2010, it did not rain anywhere in WA except for Munglanup, and I visited Munglanup that year. And, oh, and guess what? Mora Milling Group is the oldest group. Just found that out. Thank you, Dave. So what we did is I watched the district leader at the time call the leading farmers west of that line and asked them what they were doing. And so this was a group of farmers who had never ever seen drought before, according to our definition. And every single last one of those leading farmers had already destocked his enterprise. And I think that that's a really good example of government needing to understand the problem and not get in the way of the best solution. And I think that some of that thinking informed our decision making around not participating in debt at the state level into the future. Although we did, the federal government got us back into it a few years later. But it did inform our decision making about not getting into multi-peril insurance, and the government of the day's decision was that that was better served by the market. But you know what we did do is we invested in our weather station, and Meredith and Ian Foster tell me that we've got 197 weather stations and there are more planned, which is incredibly exciting from my perspective, because that's really important information. Now, and this is an example, and I think if everybody heard Ian's talk last week, you'll be aware of our real-time weather predictions that Ian is making available. This is available to any of us on our external website. Now, I have specifically put July in here because the predictions for June was it was going to be a bit dry, and I would rather see a blue map than a brown map when it's dry. However, you know, by the early 2000s, the department had over 40 different decision-making tools available to farmers and people working with farmers on our external website. So the work that we've done is just extraordinary. Now, I did talk to you about drought policy earlier, and I have slipped over my slides just a little bit. When we did look at responding to disasters for a very long time, drought was on the list of things that we regarded as droughts. But when it's dry every 4 years, you can't really regard drought as being exceptional or unexpected. An awful lot of the drought policy work or the drought programs and the investment that we have available to us now is based on that pilot of drought reform and the work that we did. So that work that we did 2010 to 2012 is informing national programs and national investment now. However, we've also, as along the way, those I've mentioned at the beginning that we went from 30,000 farmers to 12,000 farmers, and we've seen a mass exodus from our regions of the population. So we've had to come back and invest in the community resource centres so that regional people have available to them a range of services as part of their infrastructure so that they can continue to be sustainable in their environment. And Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development covers that investment. That sits with us. We also have, we've invested for nearly 20 years now. We've been investing in the Rural Financial Counselling Service, which I think is an incredibly important part of our jigsaw puzzle for climate resilience, because we are going to continue to see shifts and changes in the farming enterprises, and people will come in, people will go out, and I think it minimises the suffering. I'm particularly proud of our investment through Royalties for Region in the Regional Men's Health Initiative, which as a engagement specialist, I think that their engagement model is platinum standard. And it's probably not for today, but ask me sometime about their lurking strategy and why it works so well. Now, in 2018, I commissioned some research into, and I wanted to find out or answer the question, how many people here in WA get sick as a result of drought, which is a pretty crude question. And what we found in that study was quite extraordinary. Just driving through the 10 WA hospitals, we found that in the event of a drought or the possibility of drought, our regional hospitals will have a 4 to 7% spike in mental health presentations. However, we also found that when you have cyclonic events in the summertime, which Ian Foster is predicting more of, you have a similar spike in mental health presentations in our regional hospitals. And the association's even stronger. So for our climate resilience jigsaw puzzle, we need to pay attention to this to ensure that those communities that we serve collectively and individually have the services that they need, and our hospitals are not swamped. Certainly in 2013, I was talking to district nurses who were, having watched a whole bunch of services vanish from their system, were utterly overwhelmed by the demand for their services. So we need to pay attention to that. Now, understanding the need to protect our environment and our learning journey for this particular area of work. Initially, a lot of our work was state-driven and was farmer-driven, and my content here is really underdone as far as the farmer-directed programs, and I think that that's a gap in my knowledge. But initially, all of the initiatives, the wind erosion work that was led by the farmers in the 1970s, the Kalani Goodlands, BioLink, the Environmental Link, the Fitzgerald Biosphere and Gondwana Link, all that was farmer driven. And I think that that's been an important part of our environmental understanding. As we went along, our understanding and our need to protect the environment became a Australian, whole of Australia understanding. And so we had the decade of landcare, which if everybody, and I'm feeling like I'm twitching a lot, dear old twitching Bob Hawke, his decade of landcare was that first really important national initiative, the sale of Telstra in 1997, then triggered another 10, 15 years of investment into the Natural Heritage Trust and land care, and then after that caring for our country, which was the Kevin Rudd government. So we've gone from very local, on-farm driven, farmer driven to whole of Australia, and then in the middle 1990s, this whole caring for our environment thing started to become a global conversation with the rise of the, now I can never remember it and I apologise, IPCC, a conference of parties in 1995 with the Berlin Mandate and then the Kyoto Protocol in 97, and with the increasingly vigorous and insistent discussions about the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the like. So for me, it's interesting how through time it's become a on-farm state program to national to global, and from simple to complex through time. So we've been incredibly successful in learning how to grow food in this increasingly variable climate, in this difficult landscape. We've learned that government assistance can be useful and we can also be a problem. We've learned that research and development is an incredible important part of our investment. My apologies. We have learnt that we need to invest in human beings, not only in their understanding, but also in their development of their decision-making framework. We've learnt to invest in mental health and social support. We've learnt to invest in understanding our markets and what the consumers need. And most of all, we've learnt that we need to understand our environment. Now, oops, and now that I've gone there, I'm going back in the wrong direction. Now, within the Climate Resilience Task Force, we undertook to do an audit of all of the primary industries pillars projects to identify where they sit in terms of our climate resilience or climate adaptation. And we identified that 26% of our programs were incremental. And so those are almost our business as usual activities that focus on the short term, the next 20 to 30 years. And that would include the annual assessment of crops and new varieties, animal genetics, the bread and butter research and development projects that provide us with incremental gains. We believe that 60% of our PIT investment is transitional. And so when we say transitional, we mean significant or major changes that generate leaps in productivity or product quality. So an example would be the on-farm soil amelioration research that we've been undertaking over the past decade, we would regard as. But it's also identifying new genetic sources to reincorporate into our system for heat resistance, for frost resistance and the like. And about 13% is transformational. And so that is complete system land use change. And the best example I have of that at the moment is the relocation of marine aquaculture to cooler waters, or to look at extremely low input farming systems that sequester carbon, looking at tree biomass re-entering into the landscape. So 80% of everything that we would do. So that was just with PID, and we haven't been able to undertake the analysis of investment management of IED. But I'm willing to argue that we would get similar numbers. So we've got a lot of exciting projects underway that we're excited about. You will have heard about Richard George's Water Smart project, and I think we need to get Richard to talk about that.
He's speaking next.
Oh, he's speaking next. There you go. I'm at the moment working with Clinton Revell to understand what we might be able to do with native plant forage and whether or not that's an opportunity. We've also got the Rangelands Revitalisation Project, which is headed up by the fabulous Carrie Lee. There's Henry Brockman's Nutrient Density Project, and we're obviously very proud not only of the West Australian Agricultural Collaboration Climate Mission, but also the Katanning Research Project and all of that emissions work that's being headed up by Nancye Gannaway. Hey, we've got some applause. We're hoping to get some soil water cycle research, and we're also going to be doing some more soils benchmarking with our partners. And we have national agreement for to participate in a large national capital accounting project, which I'm particularly excited about, because having come from the landcare networks, we used to say to farming businesses, if you plant more trees, your farm will be worth more, but we never gave farmers a way to value it. And if they were able to yield a benefit, it would have been because they were good negotiators and the person buying their farm valued what they had. So I'm excited about that as a tool. So what do we think a low carbon future looks like? We do think that for farming at least, we will be moving to low input farming systems. And I think that the war in Ukraine and some of our challenges in getting fertilisers into WA at a price that fits within people's budgets right now is going to be driving a lot of interest in that. I think also we need to look even further back than our European history and have a good nosy into the traditional Indigenous land systems just to see if there is opportunity for us. Now, and I've got Brad Plunkett in the room, we have been doing some investigation into some adaptive pioneering farming systems, and there's some unpublished work that suggests that some of these adaptive farming systems that are already starting to rise up can potentially have up to 80 to 90% less greenhouse gas emissions. They can be sequestering significantly more soil carbon in their soil type. They don't need to go bust. And in fact, for the business that we looked at, although their profit put them in the average zone, their return on capital and their return on equity put them in the top 25% performance. We think that we can shift the profit with improved legumes. But there's a lot more work to do here. Now, into the future, I think some of the things that we're looking at and predicting as a possible future. Apologies for the technical incompetence. We are looking at increased plant cover and diversity across the landscape. We are considering the possibility of increased livestock numbers in our landscape, which they went up and they went down again and they vanished. I think that the benefits of soil biology, whether it's soil microflora and biology or its plant root interactions with other plants and exudates, is the new horizon that I'm very excited about. We've already got some of the new markets in place already, and I think we can only expect to see those evolve with the new green energy options, carbon ecosystem, even farm data is becoming a commodity that can be sold. We're also going to get a lot of gains out of technology, and I saw something quite recently that improved technology, placement of fertilisers, significant. I think it was as much as 70% reduction in greenhouse gases through more accurate use of inputs. We are also going to be hearing a lot more from our consumers and who is going to buy the food that we grow here. We have already seen our agricultural climate zones change, and for those of you that are not in agriculture, there's a tool that we use which is agroclimatic zones. We have low rainfall zones to high rainfall zones, and we rewrote those in the last 6 or 7 years because they'd shifted south. And I was talking to a farmer just a couple of weeks ago who their enterprise has been in our historic intensive livestock grazing, on improved pastures. And she's already reported that all of her neighbours have gone to broadacre cropping systems rather than that intense grazing pasture system. So we've already seen that, and it's going to be a trend that continues into the future. We're going to see that shift. I think, I've been working along researchers, scientists, development officers in this organisation for 25 years now. And I'll get it to you, Meredith. I'm endlessly struck by the amazing depth that I see in the people around me. And I think that every single person in this organisation should feel that they're playing a part in climate resilience, no matter where they are. I think that within our organisation, we've got an awful lot of the people that we need to predict and to plan that future. I've been really excited about opportunities to access interns and young people in the room that I've got here physically right now for the folks online. I think we are going to continue to feed the world, but we've got the race of our lives to run. We need to find a way to get our greenhouse gas emissions down as quickly as we can and to sequester as much carbon as we can. So please, I'm in the Climate Resilience Task Force. I know that I have missed people's stories and the different aspects. Come tell me what I missed. Come tell me what dates I fudged and got wrong. So I want to hear from you, and I do want to hear from people about what they think the future might look like and what might be our strategic gaps. Thank you for your time.